Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the ARCAP webinar. This is one of a series of webinars that ARCAP is running. This one is called Projects That Partner Research and Practice to Create an Autism-Friendly Society. This is something that's very meaningful to me, and I wanted to talk about really the connection around evidence-based practice. 5 years ago, I had a request from the Riverside Theatre, and my colleague Thomas and I went and started to begin Aspect's Autism Friendly Service journey. 5 years later, we're working right up and down New South Wales, in Victoria, and across the country, delivering autism friendly services. I feel like we've really developed a very comprehensive framework for what we do. So we have a very strong element of our own expertise. Most of our team are autistic, and we listen very carefully to the experiences, the values and perspectives of autistic people. And finally, when it comes to evidence-based practice, we try and integrate as much of the research as possible. This particular area is really just starting to blossom in terms of research, and it's really encouraging to see more and more information come through about the experiences of autistic people in public places and what can be done to make an autism-friendly society. The agenda today is we have 3 presenters and 3 presentations. First up, we have Dr. Melissa Black talking about the built environment and autistic individuals. Then we have Dr. Scott Brown from the University of New South Wales talking about his Autism Friendly Campus project. And finally, my colleagues Emma Gallagher and Matthew Osler talking about Aspect's Autism Friendly Sunflowers in Sydney project. And as I mentioned, we'll finish up with some time for a Q&A at the end. A quick introduction to some of our presenters. I'll do a little kind of abbreviated version. I just wanted to thank Melissa for being here. Melissa was at Curtin University and published a really fantastic lit review about the built environment for autistic people, and that's what we'll hear Melissa talk about. I can even put a link to the paper in a chat in a minute. Melissa is an OT and researcher and kindly joins us all the way from Sweden. Second up, we have Scott. Scott is a lecturer at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, where you can find him leading work around assistive technology and teaching interactive design and user experience. And Scott is actually working in collaboration with our next presenters to develop the Autism Friendly University Campus. And finally, we have my colleagues Emma Gallagher. Emma is a proud autistic woman who works as a consultant, advocate and researcher with Aspect's Autism Friendly team. And then we have Matthew Osler. Matt coordinates Aspect's Autism Friendly team and the Sunflowers in Sydney program, and is interested in learning about and creating friendly environments for all people. And we'll start the video.
Hi, my name's Melissa, and I'm really excited today to be able to talk to you about some work that we did at Curtin University in Perth, Western Australia, and the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden. That was looking at built environments and inclusive design for autistic individuals, and how we can have a look at making built environments more inclusive for autistic individuals. So before I start, I just want to note that this work was conducted by a team of people, and that team of people included occupational therapists, psychologists, and also interior architects. Okay, and here's just a very quick overview of what I'll be talking about today. So first, I'll give a brief introduction to built environments and accessible and inclusive design. I'll then talk about the study and what we did. I'll give a quick overview of some of the results that we found, and then finally I'll go through some of our take-home messages. Okay, built environments. So really when we're talking about built environments, we're talking about the interiors of buildings. So thinking about things like lighting, colouring, the flooring, how much clutter there is, smells, noises and layouts. So all of these things can influence how we interact with the environment and the people around us. So if you think about a generic office environment and all of the things in that environment that could influence your ability to work. So Is the lighting bright enough for you to be able to see, or is there a flickering light in the background that's really distracting? Are you sitting near the lunchroom and you can smell everybody's lunches? Is it an open plan space and you can hear keyboards clacking, or can you hear people talking? Is the floor really loud and echoey when people walk on it? So those are just some examples of some things that might be able to influence the way that you interact with the world and your ability to complete your work tasks. So when we think about the design of built environments, these have primarily been designed to meet the needs of neurotypical people, because they've been primarily designed from a neurotypical perspective. Okay, there has, however, been increasing recognition that we need to look at how environments can be made more accessible and inclusive for everyone. And so that's where we get to accessible and inclusive design. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the difference between these two terms. So accessible design has primarily been about whether somebody can access a building or not. So it's normally focused on meeting minimum regulations, codes, and policies. So when most people think about accessible design, they're going to be thinking about physical disabilities. So a really common example is things like ramps or elevators for building access for wheelchair users. So the consideration of accessible design has led to improvements in inclusion and accessibility for people with physical disabilities, but these considerations are perhaps less helpful for neurodivergent people and people who have a different way of seeing the world. And that's where we get to inclusive design. So inclusive design is all about taking into account all diversity in design and looking at how environments can meet the needs of everybody, both neurotypical and neurodivergent. And that's where this work is really sitting. Okay, so for this current study that I'm going to be talking about, what we did was we conducted a scoping review. And what a scoping review really aims to do is it aims to bring together and examine literature that's been previously published in this space. So through bringing together all of this previous literature, we can get an idea of what's been done, and based on this we can compile recommendations while also identifying gaps and areas that need to be addressed. So we searched 5 electronic databases for articles that described aspects of the built environment, architecture or interior design, and included exploration that was of relevance to autistic individuals. From these searches, we found 1,504 articles that we screened to determine if they were eligible. Through this screening process, we ended up with 28 articles that were included in the review. From these 28 articles, we then pulled out the main ideas and summarised them into themes or groups. We then wanted to see whether the findings that we got from the review of this previous literature was reflective of the perceptions and experiences of autistic people and the broader interior architecture field. So we then took the findings that we got from our scoping review to a group of stakeholders that included autistic adults, caregivers of autistic individuals, and professionals with a background in interior architecture, and we asked their opinions and views on the findings. So our results are presented according to 6 overarching themes: design and construction, lighting, sound, aesthetics, indoor air quality, and temperature. So while I can't go in depth into all of the findings, I will provide a quick overview of each theme and some of the key considerations and findings for each of these. Okay, so when looking at literature that touched on areas of design and construction, recommendations were primarily centred around increasing predictability in environments and reducing sensory demands. So one way that was suggested to increase predictability was to have easily legible routes. And really that's making sure it's easy to find your way around a building. So one-way circulation in spaces were suggested, having clearly defined areas with clearly defined purposes, reducing abrupt transitions and also reducing blind corners were a way to increase predictability of environments. Sensory rooms and withdrawal spaces were also recommended by lots of studies. So these are places where someone can go if they're feeling overwhelmed, tired, or distressed. So these again should be clearly defined spaces with a sense of enclosure to promote feelings of safety and security. And these spaces should also be low stimulation environments. Finally, in design and construction, some suggested that providing multiple entrances to a building can be a good idea to reduce noise and also socio-sensory barriers that could come with multiple people entering or exiting a building from the same particular space. Okay, in terms of lighting, lots of the research discussed a need to look at reducing high intensity lighting for people who are hypersensitive to light. However, other research also pointed out that some people can be hyposensitive to light. So really one of the key recommendations here with lighting is where possible to use dimmable or flexible control lighting to enable people to exert more control over their environment, and so then people can choose the lighting that works best for their particular needs. Recommendations were also made to avoid fluorescent or overhead lighting, and also to avoid flickering lighting, which I'm sure is not a surprise to anybody. So overhead lighting could cause things like shadows and visual distortions, which can be really distracting. So light fixtures like hidden or pelmet lights were suggested to avoid casting shadows. Natural light was also suggested and encouraged where possible. However, when thinking about the use of natural light, it's important to consider how natural light can change throughout the day. So for example, is the light going to be really bright and spotlighting in the morning? Or is it going to cast shadows throughout the day? So things like incorporating window shades and thinking about the height of windows is really important when thinking about constructing a built environment. Okay, so when looking at sound, most studies provided recommendations for reducing sound, which can be distracting and which can also lead to things like sensory overload. So ideas like spatial sequencing were a key suggestion that came out of the literature. So for example, zoning areas based on sound level. So thinking about the purposes of rooms in a building and how they can be grouped together. So not placing a room that's meant to be a quiet room next to a room that's going to be noisier. It's also important to consider the noise that can be generated by appliances, so things like heating or air conditioners, coffee makers, all of those things can generate noise. So again, using things like spatial sequencing might be able to help tackle some of this, so thinking about where the lunchroom is going to be placed. Also incorporating things like transition spaces were suggested, so using things like hallways or additional rooms can act as a bit of a buffer between noisier rooms. And finally, using things like soundproofing materials can help to dampen the transmission of sound. So things like using carpeting or rugs or acoustic paneling on walls can really help with reducing the sensory demands or the auditory demands of an environment. Okay, so when talking about aesthetics, again, most of the focus was on how we can remove sensory loads from the environment. So for example, removing a lot of clutter from a space can remove the demands that it places on visual processing. Again, things like complicated patterns, so really complicated geometric patterns on flooring, can also place additional demands on visual processing, which can again, or might again contribute to things like overload. Different recommendations were made about the use of colour. So some suggested that neutral colours might be preferred by some people, but other recommendations suggested that you could use distinct colours for different rooms to support wayfinding, so using different colour coding systems for rooms. Finally, things like considering texture was really important. So rough textures were reported primarily by the literature to be uncomfortable for autistic individuals. However, again, other research pointed out that there's going to be different sensory demands for different people. So really incorporating a mix of textures where possible is a key recommendation. So thinking about, can we have some rough texture, but then also perhaps some soft carpeting. Okay, and in terms of air quality and temperature, recommendations were around allowing adequate airflow and ventilation to avoid odours and smells. So to tackle smells, spatial sequencing can also be used. So similar to zoning or grouping rooms based on sound, we can also do the same thing for smells. So thinking about where different things are going to be placed. And finally, having a consistent temperature was important, as some people can be more sensitive to temperature fluctuations, so that's also a really key consideration. Okay, so when we took these findings to our stakeholder group, we found that largely the experiences and the recommendations that were reported in the literature did largely reflect the experiences and perceptions of our stakeholders. However, one of the key discussions that we had was around the need for the recommendations to be flexible and taking into account the fact that everybody is going to have different needs of an environment. We also had a lot of discussions around the practicality of some of the considerations. So, for example, if we're looking at quiet rooms or sensory rooms within a public space, how can we make sure that those rooms maintain their purpose and they stay quiet rooms? Okay, so here are our take-home messages. So we anticipate that the design principles that we discuss here can be used by designers, architects, builders, and others to inform work that makes built environments more accessible and inclusive. So it's important to note, though, that while these recommendations can provide some good groundwork or some things to consider when thinking about built environments for autistic individuals, it's important to note that autism is, of course, a spectrum condition, and like everybody, autistic individuals are going to have different needs of an environment. So really our key take-home message is that for anyone looking at how to make built environments more inclusive for autistic individuals is to actually talk to people who are going to be using those environments. So looking at how we can consult with autistic individuals when designing built environments to make it more inclusive for them. This is also a gap in the literature that we identified, where research hasn't really sought to talk to autistic individuals themselves about their experience of built environments and what they really want to see in built environments. So this is also something that we need to address in future research. Finally, while a lot of the changes that are suggested, so things like easily legible routes, changing things like windows, can be more costly and resource intensive, other recommendations are very, very easy to implement. So things like placing rugs down on flooring, putting in window shades, changing the furniture and the layout, all of those things can be easily implemented and could be done to improve the accessibility of buildings for autistic individuals in existing structures. So really, we hope this helps everyone to think about how environments can be used to support inclusion and participation. And we really hope that this work provides a foundation for more co-produced work that looks at how we can make built environments more inclusive for everybody. So thank you so much for listening to the presentation. I'm really happy to answer any questions or to be contacted. Thank you.
My name's Scott Brown. I'm an interaction designer at the UNSW School of Art and Design, where I also do research into assistive technologies, particularly for neurodivergent people. I'm here on the UNSW Paddington campus, which is unceded Gadigal country, and I'd like to recognise the First Nations people, any First Nations people with us here today. Paddington campus is known as UNSW's Creative Campus, but I recognise this has long been a place of teaching, learning and creating. So the Autism Friendly Campus project was facilitated by a small grant from the UNSW Division of Equity, Diversity and Inclusion, but it was really initiated through conversations with Autism Spectrum Australia, particularly the Autism Friendly team, who are the main collaborator on this project. These conversations happened mostly in 2021 with, and earlier actually, with Tom Tutton, who I'm sure you're all familiar with. And after we recognised that this was a good opportunity to do some autism-friendly work in the university context, Matt and Emma really drove this project. Their passion for this space has been clear throughout, and it's been an absolute pleasure working with them. So just a little bit about me, because it kind of gives some context to how this project came about and why we're interested in making our campus an autism-friendly space. I lead the assistive technologies focus of the Creative Robotics Lab. In the CRL, we're really interested in how technology can improve human-to-human interactions. So whilst it is the title of the lab is a robotics lab. We take a very agnostic approach to technology. We're more interested in how we can support social interactions, improve the human experience, and look at ways that we can use these emerging technologies to help people to do whatever it is that they're trying to achieve. I just wanted to kind of show this trajectory of my own research, because what I've learned along the way was where I started was quite naive, had perhaps more of a medical model idea of what disability was, and didn't recognize that me as an able-bodied neurotypical person was perhaps not best placed to be creating work for neurodivergent communities. So through this time working with Aspect, working with people with lived experience, I've started to learn that the importance of putting that lived experience as central to this research. And as my work progressed, that became more and more apparent. And these days, what I'm really passionate about is getting people with lived experience involved in research, involved in teaching, involved in education from the beginning. The problem is universities are not always the best spaces for neurodivergent people to come and do their best work. So we wanted to find a way to support and encourage neurodivergent researchers, students, visitors to come and use our campus in whatever way makes sense for them. To kind of just make a space to let them do their best work, to not let a lot of the processes and sensory experiences around a campus get in the way of that happening. So that's really, I guess, the crux of what we're trying to do here with the Autism Friendly Campus project. We wanted to collaborate with Autism Friendly team to do an assessment of our campus, to have a look at what is working well and what we need to change. We are in the process of deploying training for key staff to better support any neurodivergent students. And I should say at this point, we do actually have a high proportion of neurodivergent students and staff on our campus. And finally, develop any environmental changes and support materials that we're able to in response to the report, to make art and design a school of choice for neurodivergent students, researchers and collaborators. For those of you who are not familiar with the Paddington campus, we're tucked away just off Oxford Street in Paddington, next to the Victoria Barracks. We primarily teach fine arts and design here, but as is common across universities at the moment, we're really increasing a lot of the collaboration with other faculties, schools and industry. So the reason that we're starting at Paddington campus, besides it being just a great place to be, is it is a lot smaller than our main campus at Kensington. So here you can see just the difference of scale here. The Paddington campus Autism Friendly project is kind of a pilot study that we hope to roll out across other UNSW campuses. But for now, this seemed like an achievable first place to start. And just to kind of foreshadow what I'm about to show you now, there has been a lot of really great feedback from the rest of UNSW and a lot of interest in bringing this project across to Kensington. So as I said, Matt and Emma came to our campus here at Paddington to do an assessment of the built environment. They came over 2 separate occasions, both in May earlier this year. And to kind of give us, what this did was give us a starting point for understanding where we need to make changes to be more inclusive and welcoming of neurodivergent people. We were fortunate enough on the first time that Matt and Emma came that we were accompanied by 2 neurodivergent students from UNSW, Aaron and Josie, who are actually running a project that came out of the same EDI funding round. So Matt and Emma came along, they had a look at these images here, a couple of our making spaces, printmaking, and that was done in woodwork. And the third image there is our student union space called ARC. I think a lot of you will probably be familiar with the Autism Friendly framework, but I just wanted to kind of run through it a little bit because it leads us into what we put together in the report. the Autism Friendly framework looks at a culture of inclusion in the organisation. Preparation and predictability was a really big one for us. So this is around what can people expect when they come to campus, particularly for the first time. So there's a lot of what Autism Friendly would call hidden curriculum, which are things that people who've been here for a while know how they work. They might be certain ways to interact or use different spaces, but they're not always clear for those of us who are new to campus. Structure and visual organisation, things like wayfinding were getting better on campus, but there's still some work to do there. Sensory adaptations, another big one for us here. We have a lot of making spaces, so wood and metal workshops, 3D printing, printmaking, which has a lot of chemical smells. There's a lot of areas on campus that can be overwhelming, particularly on your sensory processing profile. So part of what we've done here is to map that out, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Communication supports, proactive problem solving, and participation and feedback. Those last three, they kind of, I think, link together a little bit in terms of what we did in this project, and I'll, again, talk about that a little bit more in a moment. I just wanted to kind of highlight some of the key ideas that came out of the Autism Friendly report. And this is broken down based on those elements of the framework that I just introduced a moment ago. So in our culture of inclusion, as I said, ARC is doing some good things to make a space that is very inclusive, accepting, welcoming for people, for all kinds of people. And I just want to take a moment to say that all this work that we're doing here, even though it's being framed as an autism-friendly campus and what we're doing is for a neurodivergent audience, all of these things can benefit everybody. I think, and that's the case with all kinds of inclusive design. You may be doing work to support a particular group of people, but more often than not, that is going to help everybody. And things like ARC being a welcoming, inclusive space is going to support a lot more people than just the neurodiverse people that we're thinking about here today. One of the recommendations that came out of here was to look at including a statement of inclusion, which is something that Autism Friendly have put together to let people know that they are welcome to engage in a way that makes sense for them. So the couple of things here that I'm showing I've highlighted, and these are things that we've already done, already put into action. Preparation and predictability. As I said, this is a really big one for us. The Making Centre, so the Making Centre is kind of the umbrella term for all of those spaces that include workshops, audio, visual, all of those things that help our students to create. And what they are doing really well there is things like tours and inductions that let students, particularly new students and staff, know what's expected in spaces, what the rules are to keep safe, to when and where they can access certain things, and that helps hugely with new people to feel like they know what to do. They're not overwhelmed by new information all at once. We can introduce them to a space and they know the rules and expectations there. Something that we have been working on in addition to this is a visual story that lets people who are new to campus easily identify the new space, where they might go and find things, and I'll show some of the slides that we put together for that in a moment as well. Something else the Making Centre has been doing really well is using colour-coded almost logos to define different spaces and to identify people who work in those spaces. So they've adopted this colour-coded uniform so new people can know who to go to for help. The structure and visual organisation is an interesting one at UNSW. It's a space that has been kind of put together over time, and the wayfinding is not always consistent, particularly things like elevators. a tricky one. I don't think that is unique to UNSW, but it did come up. But what I think we are doing well here is using a lot of the knowledge that we actually teach here at Art and Design around visual communication, graphic design, those sorts of things, to put together documents that are easy to read, access, around safety procedures and things like that. So students know where to find them, what to expect when they read them. It's not overwhelming. Those sorts of things I think are already being handled really well on campus. Sensory adaptation. There's a lot of spaces here in Paddington. It's quite a small campus that have natural light. We're close to trees. It's kind of tucked away, which works in our favour. We're not the large campus that Kensington is, that has a lot of people and a lot of things going on. There are some things that are probably a longer term project, however, like lighting issues in particularly the older spaces that we have here. And the classic one of hand dryers that are very loud, which could be replaced with things like paper towels or cloth towels. Communication supports. So as I mentioned, Aaron and Josie have been working on the Diversified project, or leading the Diversified project for the last couple of years, and are putting together some really powerful educational materials for neurodivergent students. So that's coming along well. Something that we are looking at the moment is how to help our staff be aware of different methods of communication. So that might be learning Auslan, different ways of perhaps engaging with autistic people on their own terms. And that's something that we're going to look at training for in the new year. Proactive problem solving. As I've mentioned, the safety procedures are already quite well organised. We have a lot of staff here who have done mental health first aid training, which is fantastic. And something that we've rolled out this year is the hidden disability sunflower training. So that was something that came out of Matt and Emma's visit to campus. And Sandy Facey has been amazing with supporting us getting the hidden disability sunflower badges onto campus. We've got probably close to half of our staff now have done hidden disability training, and we are offering students free sunflower lanyards if they choose to take that up. And finally, staff training. So as I mentioned, in the new year, we are looking at doing additional training with Matt and Emma from Autism Friendly. And as a first step, we really want to target those people who are perhaps what I would say are on the front line of engaging with students and new people to campus. So here's some of the resources that we've put together already. The Statement of Inclusion, as I said, this is text that Matt and Emma put together and I introduced to my courses this year as the project was going on. And after presenting this project to our UNSW Inclusive Education Showcase a few weeks ago, the faculty has immediately taken this up as something that will be in every course starting next year. On our Art and Design website, we are going to create a space for all of these materials to be located, so anybody new or anybody needing access to these materials knows where to find them. And one of the main things that they will find there is the visual story, which is written in an easy read language and uses images wherever possible to let people know what to expect, particularly if they haven't been here before. Here's a few images of the Making Centre wayfinding logos. So as you can see, they are colour-coded. This is not something that was originally put up around campus, and it made it a little bit difficult to find the spaces that the students needed. So this has been really well received. And again, this is something that's reflected in the uniforms of the Making Centre staff. The accessibility map, this is another thing that will live with the visual story on our website. As you can see, the existing map on the left is overly complicated. and difficult to kind of understand where accessible points of entry might be. So the one on the right is a first draft of what the new accessibility map might look like. Pulls back a lot of the unnecessary information and identifies things like all gender bathrooms, wheelchair access, gates. The main gate here at Art and Design is not wheelchair accessible, which is very confusing. So all of that I think will be quite helpful. Alongside that map, we have started working on sensory maps, which is a bigger job. So floor by floor around campus, we're going to identify any spaces that Matt and Emma flagged as being perhaps sensorily overwhelming, or maybe offering quiet spaces for people who are looking for that. So we've taken some of these icons from other autism-friendly projects to make this consistent, perhaps with people who are familiar with sensory maps from other spaces, and these will be available online. We have limited space here on Paddington. It's a tricky part of this kind of project, and looking for sensory respite spaces is difficult because of the limited space. But something that is also happening here on campus is there's some work being done by one of the academics around the gardens. Claire Millage is the person driving that project, and she's really open to this idea of making one of our gardens here a sensory space. As I mentioned, the hidden disability training has been really well received, and lots of people are really excited about bringing that over to the Kensington campus, hopefully next year. So finally, the next steps in our project, we are, as I said, looking at doing training with Matt and Emma in the new year, which we're all really looking forward to. We will be putting together sensory-friendly tours during the annual, which is our end-of-year graduating student exhibition, which starts in just a couple of weeks. And we're constantly having conversations with our neurodivergent students, who are absolutely best placed to tell us if we're on track with these sorts of things, and looking for ways to keep improving the resources and support that we have here on campus. Thanks very much to everyone for having me. If you'd like to talk more about this project or reach out about anything else, here's the ways you can find me. I'm also on LinkedIn, Twitter, and for those of you who are escaping Twitter after the Elon Musk buyout, I'm also on Mastodon there as well. Thanks a lot.
Hi everyone, my name's Emma Gallagher. I work for Aspect's Autism Friendly team. I'm a proud autistic woman who uses both my lived experience and my professional experience to design autism-friendly and hidden disability-friendly initiatives for external organisations.
Hi everyone, my name is Matt Ostler. My background is as a support worker. I've been with Aspect for 8 years. For the last 4 years, I've been coordinating the Autism Friendly team alongside Emma. So the Autism Friendly team works with a wide range of organisations, airports, shopping centres, museums, art galleries, libraries, zoos, retail, healthcare, you name it. And the common things that we do are assessing and adapting environments to become more autism friendly, developing helpful resources like visual stories, sensory maps, communication supports, and so on. Partnering in developing inclusive initiatives and events, so programs, quiet hours, that sort of thing, and also providing training either face-to-face, online, or via online module. A big part of what we do is working in partnership between autistic and non-autistic people. So our team is predominantly autistic and represents a wide range of hidden disabilities as well. And that's based on the concept of nothing about us without us. Another key feature of the Autism Friendly team is that all of our work is based on what we call our Autism Friendly framework. So this framework has been developed based on good practice research, Aspect's 50 years of good practice knowledge, and is continuously improved by autistic involvement and I guess learning from all the different environments that we work in. We also work really closely with the organisation in Australia that facilitates the Hidden Disabilities Sunflower Lanyard Scheme. So this scheme is really well recognised in the UK. It's just making its way around the world, but we have helped, I guess, bring it to airports, shopping centres, public transport, museums and art galleries in Australia. So approximately 1 in 5 Australians have a disability, and a really large percentage, so 80 to 90% of those are hidden disabilities. And what that means is they're not immediately apparent, so you can't necessarily know by looking at someone, and often that makes it difficult for a person with a hidden disability to be able to get the support they need. So being able to choose to wear the lanyard when you would like to, it discreetly indicates to people around you, particularly staff that have been trained and organisations that recognise the lanyard, that you might need a bit of extra time, support or understanding. So you don't necessarily need to disclose your disability, but the onus is on staff to adapt what they do and be able to provide the support that you might need. There are also staff badges and iconography around organisations where if you choose not to wear the lanyard, you can still approach people and get the support you need. So about 12 to 18 months ago, we received some funding through the NDIS ILC grant to develop a program called Sunflowers in Sydney, which combines both of our autism friendly work, so that list of things we do, as well as the Sunflower Lanyard, so introducing that to our partner organisations. The major outcomes of the program were to develop partnerships with relevant cultural and sporting organisations in Sydney. And part of that is obviously developing the capacity of organisations, including developing helpful resources for staff and customers to be able to be prepared when accessing places. So that's things like visual stories and sensory maps. As part of the program, all organisations are developing inclusive events or accessible events, particularly focusing on school holidays, but not just for families and kids, but also for adults as well. We also developed an online training module for staff to try and provide that consistency across organisations. We also recruited 2 people with hidden disabilities to be ambassadors for the program, so to talk publicly or talk to organisations as well. Our Aspects Research Centre for Autism Practice has also been evaluating the program, which is what we'll talk about today. And lastly, this all feeds into developing consistent good practice guidelines so that peak bodies or organisations have a great sort of roadmap and an understanding of how to embed holistically a program for people with hidden disabilities. So these are some of the organisations. I think we had about 15 that we worked with. Some were museums and art galleries. Some were events like Sydney Royal Easter Show, Eid Festival and Mardi Gras, and also sport as well in West Tigers and Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in Parramatta.
So as part of the Sunflowers funding, there was a portion of funding to evaluate the program. And the evaluation of the Sunflowers in Sydney project included 5 data collection points, 3 of which we have analysed and reported on, and 2 of which are ongoing. So there was a post-event survey for participants, so people who attended the events, about their experience, a post-staff training, so module completion survey about confidence and capacity, a post-events interview with staff from the partner organisations about their confidence and capacity when holding events. There is also a mystery shopper assessment that is ongoing, and an end of project survey with key contacts at each organisation, which is still ongoing. And the 3 that we'll be discussing are the 3 that are in bold. So the first data collection point was the post-event feedback survey for participants at events. It wasn't particularly well responded to, but the responses that we did get gave us a lot of information. So most respondents at events had not attended a venue prior to the Sunflowers event that they attended that was held by our partner organisations. Each venue had implemented a range of autism-friendly adaptations, so provision of quiet rooms, sensory maps, visual stories, and all had the option to wear the sunflower lanyard. Of all the adaptations that were made, quiet rooms had the highest level of participant awareness and use. So 100% of people who had responded to the survey had used the quiet room, followed by visual stories and visual stories or social scripts, which were 86% and 90% respectively. All participants felt the adaptations had either been helpful or very helpful, which was quite positive feedback for our program. Participants who responded to the survey highlighted the most helpful aspects, which were the quiet room, having access to public areas and quiet rooms so that all family members could attend. There was the option of comfortable seating and not being overcrowded. Being able to attend an event that was drama-free or stress-free was really important to a lot of respondents. And it was always a positive that there was always friendly, helpful, and easily identifiable staff that were available to assist. The second data collection point that we're going to talk about is the post-staff training survey. So the survey filled out after completion of the online module about confidence and capacity. At this point in time, a total of 234 staff who completed the Hidden Disabilities module also completed the post-training survey. The majority of those participants, so 95%, somewhat agreed or strongly agreed that the training had increased their knowledge about people with hidden disabilities and that they also felt better prepared to support people with hidden disabilities. And in the table below, you can see the spread of responses. The third data collection point for the evaluation was a post-event staff interview. So interview of staff after they had, from our partner organisations after they had held their events, about their confidence and capacity around that. So most staff reported that the training, support, flexibility, and proactive nature of the Autism Friendly team allowed them to feel more confident around hidden disabilities and around their events. They also reported that the visual stories and training videos provided prior to the events in particular stood out as being fantastic supports. They reported that modifications to the environment was the key to the success of their events, as they were able to make really minor changes to suit their individual audiences. So for example, being close to the public or having a dedicated room with appropriate resources. They identified that pre-event communication and preparation, which is one of the elements of our autism-friendly framework. So for example, resources like a visual story, having signage prepared, the accessibility of the quiet room, that these were key for many attendees in minimizing stress and anxiety on the day. In fact, some staff reported that families had told them that they only attended the event because they knew that these resources were available. And all staff reported that quiet rooms and overall sensory friendly environments, so dimmed lights and sensory items being available, were well received by participants. So on this slide, we have some of the key quotes that we pulled out of our interview around confidence and capacity. The first one talks about having a lot of positive feedback from families, and that families came in and they were happy to have that space available with their kids. The second one also talks about having lots of positive feedback, and that the fact that there was an entire program in place was the only reason that someone was able to attend the event. And the third one is all about how big of an impact that these events have had on the organisation. Out of that post-events interview, we also identified a range of barriers that people encountered while implementing their hidden disability sunflower events. The most frequently reported challenge from staff related to the overall event management. So a few of these events were marketed or communicated a little bit late, or were maybe scheduled on days and in times that didn't really suit attendees. For example, the first Monday of school holidays is not always the best day to have an event. Additionally, COVID-19 had a bit of an impact and restricted a lot of community engagement. So some of these events started out with very small attendance numbers and led to a gradual rebuild of these community relationships. But in contrast, one event was over capacity. Too many people came, even though the tickets had sold out, and it resulted in a little bit of a access delay and some logistical challenges. So these are some of the barriers that in future we will look at addressing. So from here, from this evaluation, we will be using this information to inform the Autism Friendly Team's Good Practice Guidelines resource, which is currently in the final stages of draft, a new iteration of the Sunflowers program, or Sunflowers 2.0. We have received more funding to continue this program with a focus on sports and activity, and also just feeding it back into Aspect's continuing work. We thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, we're happy to answer.
Super, thank you so much, Melissa and Scott and Emma, and also to Matthew as well. Just the first question is from Narelle. I'll start with you, Melissa, if that's okay, just to ask whether your research looked at exterior design as a thing, and then perhaps I'll come to Scott and Matt and Emma to see if you've got any comments about applying those sort of principles of good practice built environment design outside.
Yeah, that's a really great question, I think. And I'd be really interested to hear what the other speakers have to say about this as well. So yeah, our review looked only at interior design, but I think a lot of the principles that we found could be also applied to exterior environments like playgrounds or, gardens. So things like if you're grouping particular play equipment together or making quieter areas where a student could potentially go and sit if they're feeling a little bit overwhelmed. And I think being really clear about the purposes or, what's kind of expected within a particular area of an outdoor space might be important. But I think also, and I think it's kind of come across in all of the presentations is, if there's a way to talk to the students themselves or to talk to other people and kind of see, what they would like in that environment would be really interesting. But yeah, interested to hear what everyone else has to say as well.
Fantastic, thank you. Scott, I know you mentioned a sensory garden as part of the work that you're doing. Are there other features of the outside world that you've thought about?
Yeah, it's a tricky one because of how hard it is to change the external environment without a lot of money and a lot of time and everything else. I think what I noticed when Matt and Emma came to art and design was there were places being used that we hadn't actually thought of as these kind of sensory respite spaces, and they might have been just natural spaces outside of campus that were, under trees, and they were away from the kind of hubbub of the campus itself. There was a couple of little corridors that were just naturally being used by students as a quiet space that we hadn't framed it as that. But once we saw the students doing that, we thought, okay, if we actually let students know they can use it in this way and kind of formalize that, that's a great way of just taking what's naturally already being done. And I think, yeah, echoing what Melissa just said, you speak to the people who are already doing those things and understand what they're making use of at the moment.
Sure. Yeah. Matt, Emma, I know that you have thought about applying the framework that Scott mentioned in his presentation to places outside. I wonder if you had any comment just for Narelle.
Can I go first now? I can start. Yeah, I think just listening to the talks and the speakers, I think one thing that came out for me was the working in partnership, was co-development or hearing and sort of equalizing the voice of the people who are going to be using the space and maybe who experience or think about it differently. So I think for me that was a recommendation in the first talk of listening to people in design. I think that's, Scott seems to be a good example of including people and, seeing Scott's journey from, over the last few years of thinking about design differently. So I think that's the first thing. I think also just from what Scott said, people find quiet spaces, and I think that there's not enough of them, and that's a common, I guess, perspective from a lot of different disabilities. So I think developing more quiet spaces, obviously internally in buildings, but also in public, I think is could be parks or playgrounds or whatever it is, but developing more of those places.
Fantastic. Thanks, Matt. Emma, I know you're not 100% well, but have you got a comment?
Everybody, I'm very croaky.
Yeah.
The exterior environment is actually really hard to control, especially from a sensory perspective, but there is a lot to be said for soft, natural environments. Grass is always preferable to concrete in terms of sound absorption, in terms of safety, and just in terms of finding soft places to land outdoors that might be quiet. I think natural elements in design are really, really important, and obviously also thinking about the safety of these natural environments, especially around young people. So looking at non-toxic planting, edible planting, and things like that are really important for me.
Yeah, thank you. Narelle Aspect has actually got, I think, quite tight guidelines about how to design the outside space, and I went to one of our schools just last week to look at it in place, and plants were recommended there, and I think when the teachers first saw it, their eyes were wide open, like, oh my god, they're just going to pull them up. And in fact they did for a tiny little bit when they first got to them, but then it was like, okay, I know what that's all about now, and it's actually just become a settled part of the outside space and an opportunity for occupation. So they're starting to water the plants, take care of the plants, and actually have something else to do. So it's actually been a really interesting development in that space as well. I'm going to squeeze in one more question, I think, before we wrap up. I think particularly I'm really interested in the ideas of research leading to practice. And we have you, Melissa, who's done some research. Scott, you're a researcher who's done some practice, and Matt and Emma, you're practitioners who've sort of started to do some research. How do we keep connecting it all together? Melissa, have you seen sort of practical applications of the stuff that you've done? Scott, are you thinking about writing up and publishing the work that you're doing? And Matt and Emma, I guess, wherefore for you in terms of how do you keep connected to the work that perhaps Scott and Melissa are doing? So Melissa first, please.
Yeah, in terms of practical applications of what we've done in our review, unfortunately, we haven't really seen much done yet, although there are sort of, I guess, advances in terms of what Curtin University is doing in terms of trying to take some of the principles and trying to make environments more inclusive for the student population, because Curtin University, I know, has quite a large population of autistic and neurodivergent students. But I think hearing about, what Scott's working on and what's happening across, over the other side of Australia is very, very exciting. I think in terms of how we can work to support actually taking research into practice is, well, I think working alongside, people who are actually going to be doing these things. So I think that was what was really important or really exciting about our review, is that we kind of worked with interior architects who are actually going to be making these spaces. And so I think if we can just keep connecting with people who are going to be, building, designing environments, I think is really important. So I think just getting the message out there, it will help.
Fantastic, thank you. I know in the UK just recently they released a building standard, which hopefully we can try and have in Australia as well, that is informed by the sort of research that you're doing. Scott, what about you? Thinking about publishing the work that you're doing or expanding the practice across University of New South Wales?
Yes to all of the above. Keep on my back, Tom. I've really got to publish something out of this project very soon. Yeah, but I think, the reason I haven't published is I'm realizing how much joy I get from working with people outside of the university. I think we can get a little bit insular and siloed in the uni, and I guess it is applying my research to the real world, but working with people who are going to you're trying to support in some way is really what makes me the happiest. And doing a project like this, that you make space for those people to come in and work alongside you is what I really want to be doing. So yeah, finding a way to apply everything I do is, I guess, a bit of a goal, but I do need to publish as well.
I won't let you off the hook, Scott. Now you've promised everybody on the record. And finally, Matt and Emma, you, I know, spend your time traveling around a lot, training, seeing environments, assessing. How can you keep connecting to the research that's coming your way?
I think I'm kind of passionate about keeping an eye on the research that's out there and seeing how it marries with what we do and whether we can integrate it into our autism friendly framework and our work. I was actually really happy, Melissa, watching your presentation, because a lot of your recommendations mirror our built environment design guidelines that we've been working on that we can provide to clients and things like that. So it's all about just sort of making sure that practitioners are connected with the researchers so that these things get translated.
Yep, fantastic. Matt, the final comment?
Yeah, I have to first preface this by saying I'm not a researcher at all, but I love the idea of action research. And I think just being able to I guess that collaboration to speed up what we're learning, what's being implemented, and how people are experiencing it, and what else they need. I guess just closing that gap between learning from what we're doing and learning from what people are saying. So that collaboration, I think, would be my suggestion.
I think we're ready to wrap up. I just wanted to again please everybody in the chat thank our presenters. It's really lovely for them to give their time to do this and to promote something which I think is really, really brilliant and really makes a difference. And I think if you think about the difference that an environment that supports wheelchairs makes for people who use wheelchairs, I think if we can really keep working on these autism-friendly environments, not only will autistic people be less disabled by the outside world, I think we will all benefit as well. So thank you very much. Any other questions, please do email the research aspects research team on the email on the screen.